So a few months ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, Dave Adams presented an introduction to operations, and it's kind of a thing we've thought about on this group that maybe from time to time we'll do a series on a topic, and we've still got an ongoing series on DCC, and we're still going to carry that on. So we thought we'd start another series on operations, and Dave Adams started that a few months ago, and Dave gave a great introduction to operations in terms of a couple of things. First of all, if you don't know me, my name's Robin. I've been around in this group for a while. You probably see my face running these things. What maybe you don't know is I did work in railway operations in the United Kingdom, fresh out of college as an operations manager for British Rail, then for London Underground. But I did migrate towards long-term business planning, and I moved away from the front line into more airy-fairy, arty-farty stuff with computers and so on for long-term business planning. But now here in Seattle, I'm teaching on the edge of, do I build an SN3 or a British 00 layout? And that's a whole separate story, but I won't bore you with that. But to actually look at what Dave talked about a couple of weeks ago, he talked about operations can be thought of in a couple of ways. What are we doing? Yeah, we're moving traffic. So in our models, we can do that in many ways. And a couple of examples are the infamous car cards or switch lists generated typically from a computer program or other. And the other part of the equation is, so, okay, we know what we're trying to accomplish in a railroad, but how and when are we allowed to actually move our trains around and do something? And most people think, certainly in the narrow gauge world, in terms of timetable and train order operations, and that can become a little bit complex and intimidating, particularly if you've got new people in the layout. It's a complex set of nested rules and can be a bit scary. On the other hand, it can be quite fun as a puzzle to try and figure out what you should do or do it wrong, whatever. Things happen. But another approach is this idea of track warrants, whether they're just verbal or written down. They're much less formal, and more importantly, they're really easy to set up. There's very little paperwork involved, and fairly easy for your crews on your layout to understand. So if you're really thinking about introducing simple operations on your layout, track warrants might be what you want to do. It might be all you want to do, but it's like, the gateway drug, and you can do it at first and then move on further to more advanced topics like full-blown timetable and train operations and a dispatcher in a different room and so on with his spittoon and so on and so on and so on. But probably the most basic thing, I've mentioned this idea of track warrants. What is it? So what is a track warrant? It's really just a very simple form, probably a tiny little thing, not much bigger than a post-it note, with a list of numbered checkboxes, which you can check one or many of them. And in many of them, you then give some different restraints or constraints about what you can do in each of them. Prototype railroads use these quite a bit. They have quite a long list that covers every possible eventuality. In the model world, we probably want a slightly shorter and simpler one, but it really gives your crew the authority to move in a really very simple to understand way on a single piece of paper to actually do that. So here's some examples of some, and these are actually ones which I put together a year or so ago for my friend Burr Stewart's layout here in Seattle. He has a very large basement-sized HO layout of the Burlington Northern in 1973, but he also has a Rio Grande, Denver and Rio Grande Western H13 Empire in the middle of that. So I put these together as a way to actually control how that Rio Grande section would work. And you can see here, it's a fairly small piece of paper, again, can be the size of a post-it note. I actually print 4 of them to a letter-sized sheet of paper, so they're not particularly big. And it has, here I've put 10 possible options you might want to tell someone to do as the dispatcher, or even just the train master if you don't even want to bother with the dispatcher. The most important ones are you proceed from A to B, either the timetable train, or you may not even have a timetable in that case. Everything just runs as an extra, simply means it's not on a timetable, from A to B, in this case, from Delta Yard to Paradise, say. Put that on there, and put a time down here, sign it, give it to the crew, and that's it. You've authorized them to run from A to B. It's pretty straightforward. On the back, I usually print a list of abbreviations for the different stations along the way, so I don't have to write them in full. I just put a 3-letter code in there. And yeah, if I wanted to go as an extra train from Delta to Paradise, I just put from DEL to PAR, give it to the crew, and that authorizes them to do that. Pretty straightforward and simple. Here's, I think it's a real railroad run from the Alaska Railroad because they do actually use these things. It may not be a real one, I don't know. It's very, very similar, but it has a few more options in it. Things which in the model world we may not either care about, we may not understand, and we almost certainly don't want to be bothered with. So the 15 options on here, I simplified and added maybe one or two that are more relevant to the model world. It really makes it very, very simple to actually control, a small, well, a medium or large size railroad, so people do things without giving them all of these complicated things to actually do. So my enthusiasm for these is it's a little bit simpler than, well, it is simpler than timetable and train order operation. I mean, we often see that as a fairly hideous logic puzzle, which is fun sometimes, but I have a timetable. Am I on the, oh, I'm not on the timetable. We have superiority rules, and I have a clearance card, and I have 5 train orders in my hand. What does that actually allow me to do? For some of us, that's a lot of fun to figure out. For others, it's like, I just want to run a train. I can't be bothered with all this malarkey. So track warrants are clearer and less intimidating. There's far less paperwork, easy to do. Both of them have their place. Around here in Seattle, I like playing the role of dispatcher, air traffic controller, if you like, for the railways. Here's a picture of me at my friend Dale Kreutzer's beautiful RGS SN3 layout. You see, I've got all the traditional things you need to run a railroad. My book of rules here, my train sheet, a simplified version of the timetable here, all in front of me. I can communicate with the phone here to people around the layout. I have a nice lamp. I have an ashtray. I have my rights of trains, and I have a big glass of gin. Everything you need to run a railroad is right here. But that's not for everybody. There's a lot of stuff to actually do there, and doing it with track warrants can make it significantly simpler. So what I wanted to do just for a few minutes here, and by the way, this might be a relatively short presentation, because track warrants are actually pretty easy. There's no point filling up a lot of time with stuff that we don't actually need. But what you actually need to get started here is fundamentally, depending on how complex or simple your railroad is, what options do you need on your track warrants? So I've got some examples here, and these are actually from another friend around here in Seattle, from Roger Knowlton, who has a beautiful S-scale Monon railroad down in Tacoma, very close to where we had the narrow gauge convention nearly 2 years ago now. You can tell, hey, I stole these for Burr Stewart's RGS ones, but similar idea. You need to figure out what options you actually want on your railroad. Maybe you don't want the timetable at all, so get rid of option 2. Everything's going to run just as an extra train, basically just going to authorize everyone to go from A to B. And you can tell them where they're going to meet somebody else. Say, meet train blah blah at blah blah here. So they don't need to thumb around in the timetable and figure out. Make it really simple for them to actually do that. And take the siding at XYZ at Paradise or St. Louis or wherever it actually might be on the railroad. But the only other thing you might want to do to get started is a log sheet like this. When I just created this as an Excel spreadsheet, I just printed out blank. And so me as a dispatcher, or I as a dispatcher rather, I can fill out what all of these warrants are I've issued. And all of these boxes that say, hey, proceed as an extra train from A to B. Here on number 1, I've said engine 283 at mid, go as an extra train from mid to GSP and take the siding at GSP. So I have my own log of what happened, and it replicates exactly what I wrote on the form. It's really, really quite simple. And if you don't want to create fancy forms like that, just write them on a piece of paper or in a book. It's really, really simple to do. And if you don't want to create these warrants, you can buy them from Micromark. Micromark sells packs or tablets full of these things. I think I remember how many there are, 20 or 50 in a pack, on a pad rather, and I think they sell them in packs of 10 of those pads. Last time I looked, they were out of stock, but they're very generic, and some people use these. It's kind of the same idea. They have a couple of other options on there, but it's simplified from the real world. You can just buy them there or use them, or I just design them on a Word document. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. On a Microsoft Word document, and print them out and use my handy guillotine to chop them up into post-it note size things to hand out. So from a very practical point of view, the dispatcher, which might be you as the owner, or it might be a separate person you appoint. It could be you as the owner or train master. He will write these warrants and give them to crews, and ideally keep a log of what he's said. Otherwise, if you're trying to set up where two trains meet on a single track, you kind of need that log, otherwise you will get confused. And you probably need to track the progress somehow, either by keeping a copy of them, or instead just keep a traditional train sheet where you write down the times at which they pass different stations. Or, as I sometimes do on some layouts, just use like a magnetic board where I can put a little magnet on there and track a piece of, a steel board with little magnets on, and track the progress of trains across there. And here again at my friend Burr Stewart's layout, which I was actually just there a couple of hours ago, he has a magnetic board with a track diagram on. We have tiny, steel board with track diagram. It has tiny little magnetic doohickeys where I can write down the train number and track their progress as they move along the board. It doesn't have to be very complicated. And for Burr's main line, not the narrow gauge, for his main line, we just use those micromark pre-printed paths of track warrants, and it's pretty straightforward to actually do. What the crews will do is actually not very much. They just follow the instructions on the track warrant and any other information specific to their job, like at such and such a station, switch these industries, blah, 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 and they'll have their switch list or the cars to actually take with. That's all they need to do. And when they reach the limit of that authority you've given them, you said go from, say, Delta to Paradise. When they get to Paradise, oh, I have no more authority. Let's go around and talk to the dispatcher and get another track warrant for what I want to do next. And it's as simple as that. If you want to try and enforce the crews as they move around the layout at intermediate points, you can ask them to contact the dispatcher, use a phone system, or just yell at you. What we in timetable and train operations we typically call OSing, writing on the sheet, OS on sheet, the time they pass somewhere. Or maybe that's not necessary. Maybe you don't need to know all of that. You just need to know when they've reached the limit of their clearance on a track warrant. Then you give them a new one, write it in your logbook, and off you go. The whole goal here is to keep it in, I'll use the word informal, but not in a trivial way, but to keep it simple and reduce the stress on people operating your railroad, so you can focus on what they actually want to do, running trains and switching cars as they run around the railroad. So what do you need for a typical session? Well, you do need those blank track warrants. You can buy them, print your own. I just print 10 sheets of paper off my Word document and chop them with a guillotine. That's good enough. A logbook or a notebook, and like we said before, maybe a timetable, maybe a magnetic diagram, maybe a train sheet, whatever you actually need. Sorry, a cat just ran across my desk and scared the bejesus out of me, nearly knocked my gin over. What you don't need are things like clearance forms A, which is a timetable and train order thing. You give those when a train starts to actually clear it out from its initial station. No, don't need those. The track warrant accomplishes all of that. You don't need any train orders. You don't need to remember how to write a train order, to run early, to meet a train here, or these different forms of train orders. By the way, they're wonderful. I kind of love the logic puzzle of them, the history about how those were developed, and talking to dispatchers, of which we have many probably on the call today who've been prototypical dispatchers, certainly in a narrow gauge group. But it's not for everybody, right? And you don't need all of that head-scratching rule books and a PhD in Aristotelian logic to figure out what all of this stuff together actually means. So here's just some examples to show you. I wish that little thing didn't come up there. Anyway, So examples of some of the documents which I might actually use. So here's one of those track warrants filled in. It's sequence number 12 on a particular date. The conductor and engineer of train number 461 at Delta proceed as a timetable train from Delta to Opportunity. That's it. Give that to the crew and they can run according to timetable. That's kind of really very similar to just giving a timetable train a clearance form A in the TT&TO system and off they go, but none of that extra bits of paper. Here's a slightly more complicated one. Here I'm actually saying, hey, order number 13 is to extra number 346, so locomotive number 346 at Opportunity. Hey, your previous warrant is void. Now operate as an extra train from Opportunity to Paradise up to Par. Meet number 461 at Paradise and take the siding at Paradise. It's a real simple form with a couple of check marks and a couple of names. I've actually given quite a complex set of instructions to a train. Now, again, on that timetable and train order system, like I've given you a clearance form, and I've given you an order, and I've given you a meet order, and I've given you a note to take the siding. But it's all done like check, 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 done. It's really, really fast and actually easy to do. So yeah, that's a relatively complex one, actually done relatively simply. Down here is what my log might look like as I'm actually logging what those orders are on my actual log sheet of what those track warrants actually are. And by the way, I said I create these on a Word document. So here's a reduced version of that Word document where I put 4 to a page. It's kind of just like how you might design a business card in a Word document. Then I just print them out and chop them with a guillotine. It's really quite easy to build these yourself. And by the way, I'll remind you at the end, but any of these documents you've seen here, just contact me. I'm happy to share them with you, and you can modify them, use them however you might wish to actually use them. The idea is to make this easier for you to actually do. There are some optional things you might want to do. One thing I've done when I've been trying to figure out how a couple of railroads around here work is take a timetable and then bring what in America guys call a string line diagram. In England, we call it a train graph. This string line diagram, which shows when those trains are actually running and where they might be meeting if they follow the timetable. I find that helpful to do if I have a timetable for a friend's layout, so I can actually understand as a dispatch when I arrive where the chaos may be about to ensue, what I can do to resolve it. So I built this as just an Excel spreadsheet. I can build a timetable just by typing in these numbers. It draws this diagram for me automatically. So that's kind of a useful thing. And it's worth saying, Bruce Chubb, oh, and I missed a B off his name there, I apologize. He uses these on his Sunset Valley lines railroad, and he actually used this in the dispatch office. He actually used a highlighter or marker pen to track a train as it moved on the graph instead of using a diagram or a train sheet. He used these graphs to actually track trains moving around. It's kind of one thing you can have in your arsenal of maybe optional tools if you want to really begin to explore operations and understand where the best place for meets and so on actually might occur. By the way, it's worth saying that Burr's Denver and Rio Grande 7th Division, the extension from Montrose to Everett in the state of Washington, was never actually built, and just in case you're confused about that. The other thing, the way to track the trains is on a track diagram. And again, one way is to stick bits of sticky tape on a sheet of metal and move magnets around. Actually, one thing I was just playing with earlier today was instead of putting bits of sticky tape on a diagram, actually print it out on a sheet of paper. So this is that same kind of track layout here, tied it up, printed on paper, then just put that paper over the steel of sheet. You can modify it anytime you want. It's more flexible. You can actually maybe get it a little bit neater than sticking sticky numbers and sticky labels onto a track diagram. That's just one thing that we actually worked on today. So that was it for me today. I just wanted to introduce that idea very, very quickly of track warrants. I deliberately made it brief because it's relatively simple. And if some of you have a railroad that you have not quite got around to starting operations in, I think it's a great way to get started with minimal effort minimal hassle, and you can get a whole new team of operators in there and get them using it without them feeling confused about this arcane language of timetable and train orders. It's a great way to actually get started. And if you have any questions about it, please let me know, or any of the other guys on this call who we know are good at operations, like Dave Adams, right? He started off this discussion. Is there any of the documents on here that you've seen that you would like a copy of? Let me know. I can't give you the micromark ones, you have to buy them from them. But the other ones, I can give you that Word document and you can do whatever you like with it and print them out and buy Guillotine. So thank you. Were there any questions coming up in there?
Well, let's see, Robin, I was monitoring that and Bill Hobbs had a question in there. And as it turns out, is you continued your presentation as the answer became obvious. So Bill ended
Okay,
up answering his own.
I like
Yeah,
that. Thank you, Bill.
so that worked out real well, I think there. Um, so his question was, are track warrants given to all crews that would be affected or only to the crew being given a warrant?
Yep.
And
I think they should, if you're affecting somebody else and needs to know about it, like a train order, you should tell them all. But if you craft them well, the number of
yeah,
people that will be impacted should be minimal, I
yeah.
think.
Let's see the other.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, yeah, there's another comment in here from, I think this is probably Dave Vollmer. He says track warrants are used on railroads without CTC, but the conductor still needs a manifest to know
Yes.
what cars have to be set out or lifted. And so I think you also addressed that in you're talking about the other information the crew has, the switch list, the car cards, or whatever else it
Yep.
has to do the work at the town. So I think we've got that covered.
Yep. And I think that's how you split it really well in your first talk, Dave. That there's the the what you need to accomplish, like so your
Hmm.
switch list or your manifest,
Right.
whatever, that the crew needs to do their work, which is a little bit separate from, okay, what's my authority to proceed on a railroad and actually do all of that?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
so they're separate things. And yes, of course, the conductor needs both of those, and the engineer just will need the track warrant so he knows what's actually going on.
Yeah, Robin, if I could just add a comment or two.
Yeah.
I spend a day a month operating on a fairly large track warrant layout here in San Jose, and it was adopted Santa Fe practices. And there, one of the questions is do all trains need to know about the other train and what they're doing? And the
Yeah.
answer really is no, because the big difference between TT and TO is the crews only have to follow those instructions. And so the
Yes.
dispatcher can set each instruction up to be completely blind and still get trains safely over the road. So for
Yeah.
instance, if a warrant is written as, proceed from here to here, take sighting at, and that's if once you're in that sighting, the end of your authority leaves. You cannot move until the dispatcher gets you authority to do so. Meanwhile, he may run 5 trains by you.
Yep.
And you're just sitting. You don't need to know who they are, where they're going, or anything else. It's you're just the dispatcher is doing all of the thinking in this, unlike TT and TO, where the thinking is
Yeah.
distributed between crew and dispatcher.
And that's kind of the message I was trying to get across.
Hmm.
Some people are intimidated by full-fledged operations for two reasons. One is it seems terribly complicated, which it can be. But the second thing is the crews coming in, you need to have a certain minimal set of understanding about how it works. Otherwise, it will be total chaos and have trains wandering around all over the place. With, like you say, Dave, with this, all you need to do is follow what it says on the form. And if the
Hmm.
dispatcher did his job, all should be well. So it just
Yep.
makes it less stressful for all involved, particularly the owner of the expensive brass locomotives that will not hit the floor. So yeah, no, good question. Thank you.